We are Michael Wood, a Ph.D. in police management and former sergeant with the Baltimore Police Department, and Ty Tate, a regular person like most of you, trying to make sense of the world we all live in. A world where what you don't know can hurt you. This is Wood and T on the POV. All right. So, can you pinpoint some real-world examples of where the types of policies we've been discussing have been implemented and changed for better outcomes?
Yeah, I think the most stunning ones and the ones that really shocked me as an individual about what we were really doing in policing is the one I'll go to all the time. First thing I thought of when I heard this question was lead poisoning. The lead abatement in New York City is really a profound story. I think cannabis legislation at state level has been ultimately good. They've had some kind of moral and corruption issues when it comes to how cannabis legislation has worked. By morally, I think of you're out there locking people up for the selling the drug, and then you make the drug legal, and then the people who have been selling the drug for the last 20 years can't continue to sell the drug in the new system. That sounds like shifting a market to your preferred market. Yeah, just that one has got some serious moral issues. I always thought that the easiest thing about legalizing and regulating drugs in America was that we already had our distributors were already educated and knew their material. Like we already have the employees lined up. We just got to make some exceptions for criminal history. And there's a lot of corruption and corporate favoritism in those cannabis laws. But in the end, there's a lot less people that were put in a prison cell because of them. So I ultimately think those are good. I'm a full legalization and regulation of the drug market thing. So maybe that can be a future thing we get into. But anything that decriminalizes and shifts drug use and addiction away from the criminal ideology into the public health ideology, it has great results around the world and will continue to have those results here. Colorado saw payoffs right away. Contrary to popular belief, whenever you have a legalized market, for instance, drug use from juveniles plummets because it becomes super uncool. I mean, we even joke in my household that my daughter can never be a pothead because everybody that she's going to hang out with for the rest of her life that's a pothead, she's going to be like, oh, it's just like my dad and all his friends, who wants to be like those losers. So when things become legal, they really become uncool for a lot of people. They lose that element. The crime called there lately, getting back to New York, lately there's been some shifting in New York. So don't look at my crime causation list priorities at the moment, because at the moment, New York City is having a lot of local instability, and local instability is typically the number 3 causation in my list. The causations of violence from all of my research that I have been doing. Number 1 is environmental poisoning by far. Lead poisoning dominating that list as being correlated to violence. And the third thing is the third causation is local instability, and that's a generalized concept that includes like fatherless homes, bad laws going on, political instability, things like that. And that's what New York is going through right now. So we kind of got to step back to kind of old New York before they hit this thing. But a lot of people have talked about the crime reduction in New York City, which was epic. New York City was one of the most violent cities in all of America, and it became the safest, least violent city in all of America in a period of roughly 20 years. And when I say roughly 20 years, you should always be on to the fact that I'm about to talk about lead poisoning. And so the savior of New York and of good policies came from the federal agencies, from HUD, and from the EPA. This came from lead poisoning abatement when it comes from houses, when it comes from the paint in them, when it comes to the water. And I'll just explain this really quick. What basically happens is that lead poisons children. I mean, it's poisonous to adults. But when children consume it, it reduces the size of their medulla oblongata, which means it lowers their impulse control. It literally lowers your IQ. It causes all kinds of mental illnesses. And then what the kids grow up, And as they're growing up, they're more violent. They get more in trouble, more in school. They have less opportunity. And then when they hit about 16 to 24 years old, their violence and propensities, lack of impulse control, begin to hit the adult criminal market. And then they come to start to show up on our crime stats and things that we're monitoring and that we see. So that's where you basically kind of get this idea of the 16 to 24-year-old black male. The 16 to 24-year-old black male that's committing a lot of these violence. I haven't seen too many exceptions. Most of the ones you're going to know about, even the ones who are killed by police, like Freddie Gray, are all victims of lead poisoning. Now, this doesn't necessarily affect all the kids, but what happens is these lead poisoned kids, they grow up in their lives, their violence becomes something that the public sees, and then they are punished for the fact that they're reacting to being poisoned when they were children. And New York attacked this issue in the late 70s, and America attacked it starting in 1974 with the CAFE standards. That's when you saw leaded gas become out of the fuel, and that took the lead out of the air. When the lead was taken out of the air, anyone, and I'll do this too throughout this podcast, I will go ahead and I'll put some graphs and charts and things like that so people can see the correlations. These are like direct parallels. You go through the 18, 20-year delay, somewhere around there, and you put these charts up about how much lead is in the air versus how much violence is taking place, and they're parallel. And so after the 1974 standards, we had in the late 90s, we had this crash of crime in all of America, all from East Coast to West Coast. After we had that delay, the 18 to 20-year delay, violent crime all over America plummets. Now, some other places went further. Now, in areas like Baltimore and a lot of old cities, you have lead in the pipes. This is what Flint, Michigan's talking about, things like that. So they have lead in copper pipes. Then the water flows through those pipes, and they end up poisoning the children in the water. It's often not actually in the water source. It's going through the pipe work in these old neighborhoods. Now, these old neighborhoods, right, essentially what's happening is people are getting poisoned in their old houses, and these are actually criminal offenses already that people aren't looking at. The landlords and stuff have to take these lead out. All this lead has to be tested, but it's just not enforced. There's nobody actually going after it. Well, New York did, and they got their lead down to the lowest levels in the entire nation. They still have some issues remaining because they're not fighting it anymore. But you can go block by block in New York and see that however low the level is of lead, 18 years later, it will directly correlate to the amount of violence from people who grew up in that neighborhood down to the very block New York City tracked this. And it's quite impressive. And this has been done in Europe. This has been done in Australia. It's all over the world that they've been doing this. For the last few years, the only two countries that have lead still in their gasoline right now are Iraq and Yemen. Even terrorism seems to have a very strong correlate to the amount of lead poisoning that people are subjected to. Now, in America, this becomes racially disparate because disparate, one of those, and because what you have we had a phenomenon called white flight in the 60s and 70s, late 80s. Violence happened in cities. It got blamed on racial incidences. That was the perspective of the city white people. And then they all fled and went to the suburbs. And now in those suburbs, houses were being built with PVC, not with copper and lead pipes. So those children are not being poisoned anymore. The white kids that are growing up in the hood in Baltimore, they're still being poisoned just like everybody else. So this is one reason why you have a violence disparity between the races. It has a lot to do with that. And when it comes to low-income black, I think it's only going to get worse with some of the situations we have going now, because if cities collapse, then what will happen now in a kind of what I would argue is a much more post-racial society, then any black people and any white people are going to flee. I would call it gray flight, are all going to go out, and they're going to be back in these areas that have dramatically less environmental poisoning in them. So you're going to see it cluster more in the cities that have these people that continue to be poisoned until somebody fights the lead poisoning that's in those areas. So the savior of New York is really those workers who have cleaned up lead and the individuals who continue to fight for its elimination. often people are expecting me to point to areas like Sweden and some other very lenient areas when it comes to policing and the success that a lot of these Scandinavian countries have with their prison systems. But I don't like homogenous societies in trying to take their results and think that they can apply to America as direct things. When everybody lives in an area where you're all the same religion, you're all the same culture, you're all the same race, you can basically go about life normally because you're kind of all on the same page. A lot of things come in when we're butting up against different cultures and different ideas of what society should be like. So you can't take these small societies that are very homogenous, meaning that everyone there is exactly the same, and then transport it over to America, where we pride ourselves on being different and individualistic from everybody else. I think we have to look at things in a very different context. My opinion is that that prison systems, the way they are in Scandinavia, are obviously much better. I mean, they literally are using prisons to try and find other uses for because they're completely empty. They were so successful in the way they did rehabilitation. And I think some of that things can be done here, but you can't put somebody in a jail that has open doors in America. That's just never going to fly. I think you have to change the idea of prison being something that you are being isolated from society because of a threat you may pose to society, but that doesn't mean you have to be punishment. Like separation does not mean isolation and punishment, which is kind of how we view it now. If we would move into something where we were giving opportunities and kind of just controlling people, almost being a parent. I mean, a lot of people that commit crimes and commit violence, they never had the adult fluence. They were never really raised. So if you provide those things, I think you'll see much better results. But again, I think the fear of one person getting out of that situation and then go killing somebody or something almost ruins the political careers of any mayors and stuff that take these risks. So they're always going to be very hesitant in any of these kind of reforms. I forget who it was, but there was like a governor of New York or something like that that let a person out and the person went and killed somebody. And you're never going to recover from that. So they're afraid, but I think the best policies that you can look to right now are definitely the changing of the drug enforcement more into the public health aspect, and where lead has been fought in this country has made the dramatic improvements. We all benefited from it with the CAFE standards. Now, if we could really focus on kind of not necessarily emulating New York, but doing what they did better, all of these places could have these payoffs. It just takes time and responding to poisoned people with violence. And then think about it. This kid's been poisoned. He grows up to be violent, and then the police respond to violence. So then he catches everyone else around this person and puts them into a situation where they're more likely to be violent or have to commit another crime. And it's almost like mind-blowingly frustrating that you're dealing with some things that are so obvious, but yet we don't have the power to just reach out and fix them.